Welcome to the weekly Defence Podcast, the show about defence procurement and military technology. We are brought to you in partnership with our sponsor Nammo. I'm your host Beth Mondrell, filling in for our regular host Helen, who has disappeared on holiday somewhere in the sunshine of Portugal. On the show this week, we speak to the Group President of CAE's Defence and Security Group about training technologies and requirements. Our analyst team provides insight into trends in the 8x8 vehicle market and where nations are placing their investments. And our sponsor Nammo provides this week's industry voice. But first, our weekly news roundup, and I'm joined by Tim Martin, our senior reporter.
Hi, Beth.
And Kate Marter, our land warfare reporter.
Hi, Beth.
To give us all the news from this week. So to start with, Kate, let's take a look at the land domain. What have you got for us?
Yeah, so I've got a story from the East. I've got one from ever hardworking reporters over in Russia, in Moscow, from Alexander Mladenov and Krasimir Grozev. And they've been at the Army 2019 Defence Exhibition in Kubinka in Moscow. And they've reported that a production version of the Sosna short-range mobile air defence system, or the SHORAD, has been newly installed on a track chassis of the new BMP-3 new generation IFV. What's interesting about that is the last time that it was actually showed it or unveiled to the public as well, and that was last year in July 2018. The system was actually installed on an older generation MT-LB tracked vehicle, so they've obviously taken that away and decided that the BMP-3 new generation IFV is a lot more suitable.
And I understand when it was first shown, it was like they decided it was for export only, but now there's Russian interest in the solution, right?
Yep. So you're absolutely right there. So the Sosna has been in development since 2005, and initially it was targeted at export customers. But yeah, apparently there are now sort of tentative plans for the Russian military to commission this into service by 2022. And this is thought will initially be delivered to air defence units with a mixed inventory, so it will serve together with the Strela 10 M3, which the system is actually meant to replace. And the Strela 10 M3 has been in service since 1989, so it's about time that they perhaps got a new SHORAD.
Yeah, we had quite a lot of stories out of that Army 2019, which obviously listeners will be able to find on the Shephard Media website, but it's interesting to see all the new and in development Russian kit on display. But over to the air. Tim, I understand you're going to take us down under to the Tiger helicopter programme in Australia.
Yeah, that's right. So Australia has officially kicked off its search for a Tiger ARH replacement with its Capability Acquisition and Sustainment Group releasing an RFI under Project Land 4503. Our Asia Pacific editor, Gordon Arthurs, picked up the story and mentions that among key details for the programme, 29 aircraft are being requested, which is 7 more than the 22 Tigers ordered in 2001. Future milestones will include initial operating capability of a squadron of 12 aircraft by 2026, with FOC of the full fleet scheduled for 2028. Other key requirements include the selected aircraft being transportable inside a C-17A, which Australia has 8, and has to be operable from the deck of the Royal Australian Navy's landing helicopter deck ships. Perhaps most tellingly, though, the RFI mentions that the solution requested should be proven and mature off the shelf, and that might sound like fairly standard language, but when you look at the disastrous history of the Tiger and why it failed to live up to expectation, that stems right back to decision makers misjudging and miscalculating the acquisition.
Yeah, so I understand the Tiger isn't necessarily the only helicopter programme that Australia has had trouble with, but as we are speaking about the Tiger programme today, what are some of the problems that the Australian Ministry of Defence found with the aircraft?
Yeah, so a lot of those issues first came to light in a report published by the Australian National Audit Office in 2016, and the office itself said that the Tiger buy was considered by decision makers to be low risk off the shelf platform, whereas the NAAO take the view that the aircraft was more developmental than off the shelf. And I think that's really the key here to why, with this RFI, the mature off-the-shelf solution is very, very telling, as I mentioned. But in that report, it was also mentioned that there was 76 capability deficiencies, 60 of which were deemed critical. And from a monetary point of view, the figure of 571 million Australian dollars outlined in the original contract for sustainment costs and set aside for a 15-year period from 2004 to 2019 had already been spent by 2014. So I think, when you look at figures like that, and you also look at the critical deficiencies, it really gives a very strong sense of why this programme from the beginning was almost set up for failure.
So as you said, they're now going to turn their backs on a developmental programme. I mean, if they're having an IOC by 2026, that doesn't give any time for a ground-up development anyway. So going for a mature, off-the-shelf solution, who do you think would be some of the main players for this programme now that RFI has gone out?
Yeah, I think really it's a bit of an open secret, I guess, in terms of those lining up to replace the Tiger. So the Apache, the AH-64E, would be one. Bell's AH-1Z Viper, and Airbus could potentially offer the Tiger Mark III. I've previously spoken on the potential for replacement and those competitors with Dr. Malcolm Davis, Senior Analyst in Defence Strategy and Capability at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. And he told me that based on direct conversations with Tiger pilots, they're in favour of the Apache. But he did say that Boeing have been unable to come up with a unit cost for the Australian MOD. And he also did mention that the Vipers could well be out of production by the time deliveries are needed. And surely, given the pressure on the MOD, I'd tend to say that it's highly unlikely that it would consider running with Airbus again. Airbus, I know, would potentially dispute that, but I genuinely think it would be a huge surprise if they were to go with the Mark III.
Why do you think that?
Well, I mean, effectively just because of the whole problems with the Tiger themselves and with Airbus having been...
Try not to repeat history kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Learn from your lessons. Yeah,
exactly.
And I guess in the fixed wing fleet as well, they've gone with Boeing with the P-8, so there's already a bit of a established relationship there.
Yeah, I think, potentially you could see the Apache as a front runner. It would provide a level of joined up communications with unmanned systems and weapon systems that's been lacking on the Tiger as well. And we also know that unmanned vehicles are, of course, a very key feature for Australian Army procurement at the moment. It seeks to a replacement for the RQ-7 Shadow, and of course, it also committed to buying General Atomics' Mail MQ-9 Reaper in November of last year.
Okay, brilliant. Well, thanks for that, Tim, and we will continue to follow that programme closely. It's nice to have a new helicopter programme to sink our teeth into. But I'm going to take us back to the land briefly. An interesting development, Taiwan has requested the M1A2T Abrams tank from the US government, and this week the US Department of State's Bureau of Political Military Affairs formally notified Congress about the potential for a military sale. Now, as with all these requests, it's not a done deal at the moment and could still be blocked by Congress, as well as there's always other factors. Now, of course, given the history of Taiwan and China, this has less than pleased Beijing, and there have been reports that China has requested the US to revoke the deal. But the deal had been mentioned back in 2008, so it shouldn't have come as too much of a shock.
What's in the package then, Beth?
So in this deal, it's valued at about $2 billion and it includes 108 M1A2T Abrams main battle tanks, as mentioned, as well as M2 mounted machine guns, M240 machine guns, 14 M88A2 Hercules vehicles and 16 heavy equipment transporters. Now, so the new equipment that's been ordered on the request of Taiwan will go some way to replace their M60A3 and CM11 tanks that Taiwan currently has in service, which are, of course, becoming more of a legacy fleet now. So if Taiwan does indeed get the Abrams main battle tank, it will join a small group of customers for the vehicle, including the US, Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. But this small group of customers doesn't mean a small number of tanks. Of course, the US has the largest number with around 1,500 on order to date. The manufacturer is General Dynamics Land Systems, and they will be the prime for Taiwan. So it'll be interesting to see if this goes forward.
Yeah, so Beth, I was just about to ask about that. So it's actually quite a lot of tanks, and obviously with everything with like the China-US trade wars and what's the situation in Hong Kong, how likely do you think this is a case of just bad timing? Do you think it's going to go ahead anyway?
I mean, as I said, it was kind of mentioned back in 2018 and nothing stopped the process going forward so far. It's a relatively large number. I mean, 108 tanks with all the extra stuff, $2 billion package. So, I mean, I guess we can't really predict the future, wait and see, but I'd be surprised if it does get blocked, especially if it's Beijing making a fuss about it. The US might want to show that actually we don't bow down to those powers. But yeah, the equipment will contribute to the modernisation of Taiwan's fleet. So they're obviously keen to keep this deal going. And one other one, just a small one really, out of Austria, the 32 all-terrain vehicles, the BS-10s, are edging towards their initial operating capability. But with this, our reporter, Mikhail Jarocki, who's based in Warsaw, spoke to an Austrian Minister of Defence representative who has confirmed now that will be it on orders of this all-terrain vehicle. It had been said that there might be an additional order in different configurations. At the moment, it's just the armoured personnel configuration, but apparently that's it. They're going to stick to those 32, and whether they'll look at other options or whether they've got other plans in the works for a different kind of ATV to fulfil different operations. They're being relatively tight-lipped at the moment, but yeah, that's it for me. But as our Sea editor is out in France, enjoying the coastlines there, I thought it was worth mentioning that obviously this week the news has broke that the HMS Queen Elizabeth, the new aircraft carrier for the UK's Royal Navy, has been brought back into port with a leak, which, according to some reports, saw the water rise neck high in some flooded areas. Obviously, this is not good for the ship as it's out on trials at the moment, but we don't know how this will affect the programme going forward. There's obviously a lot of talk about why these issues came about. It's apparently there have been no damage to the breach or the hull, and the issue was isolated, according to various reports. But I think we've all seen the ship now. I've seen it. I saw the sister ship, the Prince of Wales, up in Rosyth, and I've seen the Queen Elizabeth down in Portsmouth. How about you guys?
Yeah, so a couple of months ago, I had a break actually, and took a trip to Portsmouth, and the HMS Queen Elizabeth was arriving in the dock, so stood on the marina there and had a chance to look at it. It is exceptionally large.
I think I'm the only one here who hasn't actually seen this.
Well, it's back in Portsmouth now, so we're not too far away.
Tim, how big is it? How big are we talking?
Yeah, well, to give a sense, I guess, I was standing on the marina, and along with a lot of other people, waiting on it arriving, and as it approached, you could only just about see the top of it from in the distance, with the other buildings in the forefront. So yeah, it spikes up over the other buildings, which is is quite an impressive sight when you see it firsthand.
Yeah, so luckily I think with this latest issue, while it is damaging to the ship, no one was fatally harmed in the incident. And I'm sure when our sea editor is back on dry land, he will have a little bit more to bring us regarding that. But thank you so much, team, for the roundup. Coming up on the podcast, we sit down with CAE's Jean Collier-Battisto to talk about training, simulation and new technologies. But first, I speak with our Shephard Plus analysis team about their research into the 8x8 armoured vehicle market and the trends that have emerged.
We wanted to take a short break into the podcast to tell you about Shephard Studio. Studio is our branded content offering, which gives industry a more creative way to tell their stories. Shephard Studio works closely with companies and event organisers across the aerospace and defence industry to provide bespoke co-branded solutions. Whether it is support of a particular campaign, content surrounding a major trade show, or bringing Studio on board to more effectively tell a company story. Studio has already been adopted by many of the major defence primes. If you're interested in learning more about Studio projects and how they could benefit your company, please contact us at www.shephard.studio.
I'm here with Matt Smith, our Director of Analysis, and Sunny Butterworth, the Land Domain Analyst here at Shephard Media. Now, guys, you've recently carried out a deep dive into the 8x8 armoured vehicle market. So, Matt, starting with you, can you tell us a little bit about the work you've been doing?
Sure thing. So we recently released our 10-year armoured vehicles forecast. And one of the really interesting things in that forecast was just how dynamic and how big the 8x8 market was. So in preparation for DSEI, we decided to take a much deeper dive into what's going on in the 8x8 space, take a look at some of the major programs that are going on and identify in a sort of more granular way some of the key trends that we think are going to impact the market now and also over the next sort of few years.
So over to you, Sunny, then. As the land domain analyst, obviously both you and I have been on the road this year and we've seen various trade shows where a lot of 8x8s have been showcased by various manufacturers. So what are some of the current market trends you are seeing in this arena?
Well, I'd say the first thing that stands out is just the sort of sheer variety of platforms that are on offer at the moment. It's a very sort of busy, dynamic market. There are lots of ongoing programs, particularly in Europe, the Middle East and the Asia-Pacific region. I would say one of the sort of standout trends I've noticed is that there's a great demand for local kind of production and industrial offsets to be offered as part of these contracts so that the militaries that are procuring these platforms, their countries can see some of the benefits of this money. So while there are some clear market leaders such as the Artec Consortium's Boxer, the General Dynamics Piranha and LAV series, and Patria's AMV. Many of these have been adapted for local production, so Poland produces the AMV as the Rosomak. The Boxer is produced in several different production lines, in the Netherlands, Germany, and possibly perhaps in the UK. Part of it will be assembled.
With the new Rheinmetall BAE Systems Land, that seems to be what they're going for, isn't it?
Exactly, and also in the Middle East, you've seen joint ventures such as the UAE's Rabdan, cooperation with Otokar of Turkey, I believe, and so that's one of the big standouts. There's such a proliferation of suppliers. I think also we've noticed that part of the demand for wheeled vehicles, they've began to almost displace tracked vehicles from some roles. So particularly a lot of countries operate large numbers of things like the M113, and these can now be replaced by wheeled armoured vehicles, which are now much more mobile, much more better protected than these legacy vehicles. I think a good indication of this is the US Marine Corps, ACV, Amphibious Combat Vehicle Program, which is a role that's traditionally always been fulfilled by a tracked vehicle because you need a vehicle that can not only swim from ship to shore, but also traverse sand, maybe coral if it's in the Pacific, very difficult, demanding terrain. And this has now been fulfilled by a wheeled vehicle, the Iveco Super AV, in cooperation with BAE Systems. So I think those are some of the main findings we've had, and the market certainly looks set to still be quite active in the near future.
Yeah, and we've seen like a lot of 8x8s being shown in like different configurations. So again, at IDEX, we saw the Patria 8x8 with a Leonardo turret on, showing that it can also be used in a way that can have a weapon system, like quite a significant one, integrated onto it. So you've kind of touched on why there are so many vehicles on offer, why people are leaning towards them. They're able to replace the traditionally tracked vehicle operations. But is the market becoming a little bit saturated, or do you see that the demand for this continues?
I think there are certainly lots of ongoing programs at the moment to sustain demand, but there is certainly a big question mark over how sustainable it is, given just how saturated the market is, as you've said. One has to wonder what will happen to these local production lines that have been set up once the demand for 8x8s has been fulfilled, because we're predicting that most of these platforms will have a 40-year service life, and that could, of course, end up being much more, as we've seen with some of the Cold War vehicles. Budget constraints can often force them to be in service for much longer than militaries originally intended. So the question is, where do they go next when all these export opportunities dry up? And particularly if you look at the European market, many of the programs are now ongoing, but they've already been fulfilled. So there are fewer and fewer opportunities available. Yeah,
a lot of contracts have been signed, or decisions made at least. So it's kind of trying to get into the manufacturing opportunities now, rather than the actual, we've got a new platform, please buy it. So we've talked about what's going on, but can you go into a little bit more detail about the research and some of the key factors you see for the market going forward?
Yeah, so I think the 8x8 market, certainly in the next 10 years, is still going to be a very big part of the wheeled armoured vehicles market and of the armoured vehicles market as a whole. We've recently conducted a armoured vehicle market forecast as part of our Shephard Plus online business intelligence service. And we've predicted that the wheeled armoured vehicle market will account for up to $83.9 billion of spending between 2019 and 2029. So yeah, it's a very big section. Having said that, though, as we alluded to earlier, we've noticed that the CAGR is much lower than some of the other sectors. So the tracked armoured vehicles, so tracked infantry fighting vehicles, and also main battle tanks, because as we know, armies are starting to gear towards a near-peer conflict, and main battle tanks, for example, have traditionally been quite neglected in the past. So we're expecting to see perhaps a shift in emphasis towards these more heavier assets that complement, I think, the wheeled 8x8s rather than...
Forms part of the overall formation that armies are going for sure. So, Matt, for our listeners then, what do you think are some of the key takeaways regarding the 8x8 vehicle market, and where can they find this information?
Well, Beth, I'd really echo what Sonny said earlier on. From our perspective, the versatility of the 8x8 has made it really a very commonly procured system. And that has had benefits and negatives. The benefits that are, in terms of industrial production, there are an enormous number of choice. Countries can procure from a dizzying array of different kinds of vehicles. On the negative side, as we sort of mentioned earlier, it does feel like we might be at peak 8x8 at the moment. Yeah. So if you were looking for where the market's going in the future, the question would be, where's the growth going to be? It might not be in production, it might be in sustainment. So I think there's some questions that organisations need to ask themselves about, where they see that market going. And for our listeners who are looking for ways to access our information, there's a few different places. We have a forecast report that I mentioned earlier that's available through subs@shepherdmedia.com. You can access all of our platform information through Shephard Plus, which is our online business intelligence tool. And also, we'll be at DSEI on the stand. So please come and have a chat to us, and we can. We'll be handing out copies of the handbook, and you'll be able to access Sonny's 8x8 deep dive market report there as well.
Well, brilliant. And I'm sure some of our listeners will be at DSEI, so we'll see those guys there. And thank you, analyst team, for going into that deep dive of the 8x8 vehicle market with us.
After almost 40 years in the defence publishing business here at Shephard Media, we have built up a strong and loyal audience across all sectors. Our content is trusted and consumed by key decision makers through multiple channels. One benefit of having such a dedicated audience base is our ability to offer a comprehensive range of message delivery options for the discerning advertiser. From brand awareness campaigns across a combination of print and digital media, through targeted email campaigns or show dailies, to a plethora of online opportunities, or even advertising opportunities within this podcast itself. If you'd like to learn more, please visit shephardmedia.com/advertising to discover more about the many advertising options available. We are at CAE, and I'm joined by Jean Colabattisto, Defence and Security Group President at CAE. Jean, thanks for joining us.
Hi, good morning, and thanks for having us today.
CAE has seen its business model evolve over recent years from a simulator supplier to a training systems provider. How's that journey happened?
And you're right, and this has been quite a transformation for the company. If we look back only 5 or 6 years ago, we found that 80% of our business was in providing hardware and software items, solutions, mostly simulators, to support flight training. Today, our business is quite a bit different. More than 50% and approaching 60% of our business are services-intensive solutions where we provide more than just a simulator, but we look at the entire training challenge and we form a solution that may include simulation and it may include live flight training, but also the provision of instructors, courseware, appropriate facilities, and increasingly new digital technologies.
One of the hot topics, as I'm sure you'll agree, is the pilot shortage. What active role is CAE playing in being part of that solution and, I guess, supporting the Defence Forces?
There's quite a bit of discussion about the pilot shortage around the world, and I think it's worth talking about a few of the dimensions of this problem, and then we'll talk. I can talk a little bit about the role we play in forming a solution. First of all, this challenge is systemic. It spans not just the military, but both military and civil aviation. It's not unlike the challenge we face as a technical company in looking for engineering and technology professionals. And it really starts with creating an interest in aviation and whether that person is interested in civil aviation, being a pilot in the military, or doing something that's not in the cockpit, but doing something related to aviation otherwise. But today, it has become a big challenge because we need to generate a long-term pipeline, because if we don't, the problem will get only worse over time and not better. When we look at the problem, we are involved in pilot generation. In the case of the military, we call it force generation. And it's not simply pilots, but the right types of pilots flying the right types of aircraft over the course of their career. So this challenge cannot be met simply by recruiting. It cannot simply be met by training, nor can it be met by retention. We have to treat this as a life cycle issue. And we look at our role, as we said earlier, as a solutions provider. When we look at the training solutions we provide, we first look to make our solutions more effective and efficient, and that's simply going to help increase pilot throughput. We do that in a couple of ways. In generations past, pilot training was almost an attrition-based system. The training was very challenging, and quite honestly, the best pilots survived that process, and we were left with the most capable aviators. Today, the entry-level body pool is not quite as large. So we spend more time screening applicants to make sure they have the aptitude and desire to make it through the process. And we're going to help them make it through the process with more individualized training and better training tools. And we think the introduction of digital technologies, a more immersive, live, virtual, and constructive training system all contribute to that. The other part of the equation that's interesting, and it's a role that industry plays, is increasingly governments around the world are relying on companies to fill roles that in the past were considered government functions. Today, we have instructors standing up in front of classrooms or doing videos and podcasts. We have instructors certainly training people in the simulator, and we also have them in the cockpit of aircraft acting as instructor pilots. Our ability to provide highly qualified aviation professionals, put them in front of a classroom or in a cockpit, simply relieves military personnel to work on other tasks that only the military can do. And that actually helps break the cycle that allows the military to make better use of the pilots it has today, or more efficient use, and in the meantime not slow down the pilot pipeline. So that becomes a bit of a force generator for the military.
I wondered if you could share about technology trends. What's the next kind of suite of technologies that you're looking at or foreseeing?
And as we said, both in our evolution as a training system integrator and the way we contribute to the pilot shortage, technology plays a very important role because it simply makes what we do more efficient and effective. We look at the technology that we insert into the process in three broad categories. One is we look at what we call the digital learning environment. Think of that as the classroom of the future. Another is this integrated live, virtual, and constructive training environment. And the third is the secure network environment. Today, almost all of our training systems are networked together to allow for joint and team training. Some of the interesting technologies that fall in those categories, and one that we're promoting quite heavily is a program called CAE Rise. CAE Rise is our attempt, and we're implementing it today, to take advantage of an asset we have, which is a very, very large data set from the activities of student pilots. And we have a very good idea of how not an individual, but a student pilot population is performing. That large data set, that big data set, coupled with some data analytics and also with some artificial intelligence, allows us to take that data set, take a pilot's performance and compare it to that data set in real time. And allows an instructor to see how that student is performing, and then also make instructional recommendations in real time. It is difficult for an instructor to keep an eye on the airplane, the pilot, and also become the safety officer all at the same time. The instructor is the pilot in command. In a simulator, it's while safety is not the issue, there is a lot to keep your eye on, and it's easy to miss things. The RISE system will not only allow that instructor and give that instructor cues and help them not miss anything, it'll also take data from that training session, put it back into that database, and create an even richer data set. So over time, the data set and this entire process becomes more efficient. And that'll contribute to that first part, the digital learning environment. A second technology that I'd like to use as an example is this new generation of visual systems that we're using to improve our simulators. We call it the eVisual simulation system, or the eVisual system, and the E is for electronic, because the collimation and the geometry that makes our eye look at those visuals and make it look like reality is not simply done with the geometry of the projectors. Yeah. It's actually done electronically, and that allows us to be more efficient and effective in creating a visual presentation. The market has this never-ending desire for more visual resolution. Mm-hmm. I guess as we as consumers like HD TV, our customers and our users like to have very high-resolution visuals, and this is one more step in making the visual more realistic and makes the entire training environment more immersive. Mm-hmm. I guess another example of a technology that we've moved out on this year, also part of the integrated environment, is a new simulator. It's the 700 MR series simulator. You wouldn't know it, but we actually call this a mid-fidelity simulator. Today, a mid-fidelity simulator would have been considered very high fidelity in the past. The point to be made, though, is that when we approach a training problem, we don't just apply a simulator or a classroom solution or an airplane, but we look at the aircraft, the simulators, and that digital learning environment as a training continuum. And we're now including augmented and virtual reality in that solution set. But at the end of the day, we'd like to move training requirements to the appropriate place on that continuum. And this 700 MR flight training device provides an important mid-fidelity capability that allows us to move certain tasks now off the aircraft or off the high-fidelity simulator and make it more cost-effective. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your insight, Gene. Yeah. Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Thank you. And thanks for allowing me to talk a little bit about CAE.
So welcome to this week's Industry Voice segment, which is the part of the show that's brought to you in partnership with our sponsor, Namo. I'm Tony Skinner, VP of Content here at Shephard Media, and I'm joined once again by our regular contributor, Andre Lalonde, who is the SVP of Communications for Namo. Good afternoon, Andre.
Good afternoon, Tony.
So in sort of mid-June, we had the Paris Air Show, which was the kind of the biggest event, I guess, on the trade show calendar, or one of the biggest events this year. As we go to events like the Paris Air Show, like DSCI, the question kind of always strikes me is are these kind of events still relevant? Mm-hmm. You know, the Paris and Farnborough are kind of scaling back the air displays, but we've still got a number of 4 or 5, 6 big halls with companies showing their wares. So from industry's point of view, are these events still relevant? Is your presence at these big trade shows still crucial in terms of you being able to do business?
Exactly. Absolutely. I think they are, but in a different way. I mean, we're now sitting on the trade show floor here, and 10 years ago, when I was first at Paris Air Show, you could barely have a meeting because every 10 seconds you had to stop and wait for a fighter to fly past.
Sure, yeah.
And just let the noise dissipate. So that was just like the afternoon of every day. Now, today, we've had 2, 3 fighters displays, and they're short, and it's not really every market being represented, like the French fly theirs, and you actually have the Chinese one, which is a little bit interesting, but that's not what this is about anymore. Farnborough last year, there was a fighter fly past. That was it. It's not about the displays anymore. So these trade shows, they're not so much about the shows. They're not about showing the wares, because everyone can see this on a video. So think about it like in the 60s and 70s, how could you see a fighter fly? You had to go to a show.
Sure.
And now you have the videos, you got the video platforms, you got you guys putting out stuff for when you go to demonstrations, or you have forces or manufacturers putting out their own videos. So that's where people see it. This is now a meeting place. And that's really what it's becoming everywhere. So there's no point having all those fighter displays anymore. This is about the meeting place. It's about coming together and meeting people. You're going to have like several months worth of meetings in 1 week.
I guess the extension of the question is also really whether events like Paris and like DSCI are as important, as a one-stop shop with all your kind of supplier base and all your potential customers, as opposed to going out to the nations themselves. We're increasingly seeing nations hold their own events. Yeah. And if you want to sell into, the Middle East, you go to IDEX. If you want to sell into Indonesia, then you go to their
Yes.
main trade show. Is that increasingly more important, that you're supporting customers and supporting their own domestic events, as opposed to, well, we can go to Paris and the delegations will come by and we'll see everybody we need to?
Yes and no. I mean, I think you have a much clearer tiering of events. So you have some events that are clearly in that local tier. So you're there to meet a specific customer, there to talk to a specific market or a specific product. Those are still there. But then you have that much clearer, very small cluster of truly global events. That's where you have all the delegations. That's where you have all press like yourself are going to be there. Those events are fewer, becoming bigger, and more influential. So you have you have fewer and bigger ones, and then you have a very large number of small that were much more focused on customers and users and on a select few products in a select few countries. So you have those two, and then you have the mega events.
Sure. And what's the... This might seem like a simplistic question, but what's the focus for you guys while you're here? Is it the networking? Is it kind of meeting new people? Days of kind of trying to get things on contract and announcing, we just signed this yesterday. Yeah. Those days seem to be behind us a little bit,
Yes.
But obviously it's still beneficial from a networking, brand awareness type exercise.
It's networking. It's making sure that, there are certain people who wouldn't make the trip out to see you if you wanted to have to agree in months in advance. So you have people here who are more like the walk-ins, people who take the initiative, like, hey, might this be an idea? Or, yeah, that could lead to something, right? And then it's some companies that on these trade shows, for once, they actually have all their executives in one place. And you can get the kind of meetings that otherwise would be very difficult to get, because otherwise it's like, well, these guys are in traveling or these guys are in internal meetings. Well, now they're here. So for that part, it's actually very important. So you will see, for instance, at the largest shows, DCI and AUSA, big for NAMO, we focus a lot on having meeting rooms and good opportunities to sit down and talk. Because to us, that's really what it's about. It's about meeting people. It's about showing that we're interested in having those conversations. And then, we want to show some things in terms of, because press is there too. You guys don't have the same kind of travel budgets you did. You're not not saying Shephard specific, but industry, like media industry, there's not the same amount of correspondence, same amount of traveling, same amount of people covering it. So you also have to prioritize your main events. So we do the same. We make sure where you are, we are, and we try to build it around that.
So presumably, you need to come to these big events with a press strategy, marketing strategy kind of in place as well. So it's not a missed opportunity.
Press is not, you don't pursue get press to come to a big press conference, or you have to be really the primes then, or governmental briefings. Otherwise, you can't expect a walk-in. You have to work with people a long time in advance. You have to build these relationships all through the year. And then it's let's go to Paris and let's talk about this thing that we've been talking about for a couple of months. This is just waypoints during the year, more than the individual highlights. This is really where things kind of come to an end that you've been working on for a long time.
Well, this whole conversation does remind me that we do need to prepare for DSCI, and it'll be here around the corner really soon. And I'm sure we'll see you guys there. So
absolutely,
Andra, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
This episode of Shephard's Weekly Defence Podcast was brought to you by our sponsor NAMO. If you've enjoyed what you've heard, please head over to shepherdmedia.com to access all our news stories and subscriber content. We'd love to hear what you thought of the podcast, so please do subscribe, rate, and give a review on iTunes or other podcasting platforms. Thanks for listening.